So we all know about the concept of super spreaders, right? We vaguely have an idea of what super spreaders are, a closed area where there are people and then they spread spread the virus in a large number of people. But internationally, there was no comprehensive study on the various super spreader events all over the world. Up until now, where a Canadian agency, Quillette, has been able to catalog these super spreader events. Research identifies how the virus preys on the physically intimate congregations, right? Strong words, powerful words, and we have to listen to them. Physically intimate congregations. That means people in a closed group in a confined space. Study catalogs 58 super spreader events in 28 different countries, and that's why I call it extremely comprehensive. And my next guest, he's a newsmaker tonight, very, very significant, the man who has authored this piece, Mr. Jonathan Kay. He is the editor of Quillette. Thank you very much, Jonathan Kay, for joining us. First of all, if you could very briefly tell our viewers here in India, what have you found in your study, in your article, in your piece?
Well, thank you for your interest. I should say that Quillette is a journalism site based in Australia. I work in Canada, but of course the data is international. And as you said, I was quite interested in looking at super spreader events. These are events where many people have gotten sick from COVID-19. The database is now, it's close to 100 events, because as soon as Quillette published some of its data, we started getting new information from around the world, including from India. And what we have found is that, of course, the disease spreads in nursing homes, in old age homes, in family circumstances, but we wanted to look beyond that at what kind of commercial activities, what kind of recreational activities put people most in danger. And what we found is that activities that were face-to-face activities, especially where people were excited, animated, parties, sometimes they were grieving at funerals, religious events, especially religious events involving mass participation, where people are, say, at a festival, they're eating together, but the key seemed to be face-to-face activity, especially indoor face-to-face activity, highly congested environment, close range, again, cheering at sports events. Anything where you're cheering, singing, that kind of thing, that is highly represented in the database we have put together at Quillette.
Very, very, very significant data. Now, Mr. K, in your write-up, I saw that there was an insight on when and where these super spreader events take place, and basics like when people are laughing, shouting, cheering, sobbing, singing, greeting, and praying together.
Well, yes, because if you look at the dynamics of the way diseases are transmitted, they can be transmitted in several different ways. One way is extremely fine particles that come out of our mouth just when we talk. And those can be in the air for minutes or hours. They're so small that they essentially float. But the other, or another main transmission mechanism is large droplets of fluid that come out of our mouth, especially coughing, sneezing, or as I said, cheering, yelling, singing, all these things, animated states of respiration. And that is a completely different kind of transmission mechanism. And for many diseases, doctors have to figure out what is the main transmission mechanism. The fine airborne particles, which tends to be the case, for instance, with measles, or the larger droplets. And the fact that it's all these face-to-face activities, close range, ballistic transfer of large droplets from one person's mouth and nose to another person's face, this suggests, I myself am not a medical doctor, I want to stress that, but this suggests a large droplet ballistic mechanism of transmission, which means that avoiding direct face-to-face contact in these animated states is extremely important. But I should say also that what we didn't find in this database of super spreader events were situations where people were very close together, however, they were not face-to-face. So for instance, airplanes seem to be extremely safe, not just based on our data, but the IATA released data, even though they're packed together very close in airplanes, They're not typically in an agitated respiratory state. They're not typically singing or cheering. And crucially, they're not facing each other. So this also, by negative inference, suggests certain kind of activities which could be much safer than the kind of super spreading activities I've been describing.
So is that the reason why wearing a mask is all the most crucial now? Because, you know, if you are face to face in public, and if there is a physical barrier between the faces, it makes all the sense.
Yes, and originally when there was a debate about mask use, they said, well, unless you're wearing a medical mask, very, very fine particles can escape into and out of a mask, which is of course totally true. However, if the main transmission mechanism is larger droplets that come out of our face when we're, you know, all these activities we've been describing, then a mask, even a mask that is not medical grade, will help you immensely. Now, no mask is perfect, and there is no substitution for social distancing, even if you're wearing a mask. However, the larger the droplet, the more effective any mask is going to be at stopping that droplet.
Jonathan K., this one point that you mentioned came as a bit of a surprise for me, that even in normal conversation, if people are face to face, in a normal conversation also there is, people end up throwing particles in the air, very small, tiny particles, and that can also be potential carriers of the coronavirus.
It's absolutely true, potentially, and of course there's infected surfaces, which we haven't talked about yet. That's another transmission mechanism. However, my background is in engineering and fluid dynamics and thermodynamics and that sort of thing. So I'm inclined to look at things like, what is the total volume of material that is coming out? What is the velocity? So it is absolutely true that small particles come out of our mouth when we're talking all the time, even when we whisper. However, speed is important. When you speak normally, typically your breath comes out maybe 1 or 2 meters per second. But when you sneeze or cough or cheer or scream, it could be 20 or 30 or 40 meters per second. So physics matter, because ultimately, at the end of the day, a transmission of a disease, it's not magic. It happens by physics. And if you use a mask, if you speak softly, if you tilt your head downward, you avoid congested situations, you go outside rather than inside because people have more control of their space, typically outside, though not always. These are situations where you can use simple physics. Even if you don't understand virology or don't understand epidemiology, simple physics dictates that there are common sense ways we can use to limit the physical propagation of infected particles, especially to the extent we know that it is the larger particles that are the problem, although it is completely possible that an accumulation of very small particles in the air could have the same effect. I think scientists are still studying the relative contribution of these two transmission mechanisms.
Great insight, Jonathan K. What's your next write-up on?
Well, you know, I hope that I will not be writing about this subject in a couple of months, because we will have suppressed the disease and we will either have a vaccine. So. Yeah, let's hope so.
All right, Jonathan K., thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us right here on NDTV.